Here is how you can create a mouse parallax effect in Framer with our mouse parallax component without writing a single line of code. So let's start with a blank project and enable layout for our desktop breakpoint. Then draw a frame in it and rename it to something like Mouse Parallax, just to keep everything organized. Let's give it a width of fill and set the height to viewport. Then adjust the height of our desktop breakpoint so it matches with our container. Then let's enable layout for our mouse parallax container and remove its fill color also. Next, we are going to import a background layer on top of our mouse parallax container. So let's draw and frame and position it to absolute and give it a width of 110% and height of 110%. We are making it bigger from the parent container so that when we add our mouse parallax effect, this layer does not exceed our parent container. It will make sense once we have our mouse parallax effect in place. Let's rename it to BG and upload our background image in it. So once we have our background image, let's lock this frame so that we do not select it accidentally. Next, we are going to add a masking layer on top of our background image. So let's draw a frame and rename it to masking and upload our masking image in it. Position it to absolute and give it a width of 110% and height of 110%. Let's actually reduce the opacity a bit so our background triangles are more visible. So once we have both background layers in place, we are going to add a center element from where we will build our rest of the design. We are going to add a looper sprite in our mouse parallax container. So let's draw a frame and rename it to center looper and upload the looper sprite in it. Let's give it a width of something like 650 and adjust the height as well. Once we have our center point set up, let's add a text on top of it just to add a little bit of more detailing to the design. Position it to absolute and align it to center. We are using a custom typeface and a custom color for the text and a size of 180 pixels. Let's lock the text frame and lock our center looper sprite as well. Next, we are going to add some particle sprites to our design with which we will add the parallax effect. Let's draw a frame and rename it to particles container. Set the position to absolute and give a width of 80% and 100% of height so that the container covers 2/3 of our page. Let's give it a left constraint of 140 as well. Remove the fill color. Now we are going to place some particle sprites in it kind of randomly and adjust the height and width accordingly. Let's rename the frame to particle and begin placing the rest of them. Set the overflow to visible for our particles container so we can add some particles slightly distant from the rest of them. Once we have all of the particles in place, let's set the z-index to 2 for our particles container so that all of the particles are on top of everything else. Next, we are going to add a separate particle sprite and make it bigger than the others. Let's begin positioning it and upload the particle sprite. After everything is set up, let's begin with implementing the actual mouse parallax effect. Let's import the mouse parallax component in our project. you can place the component anywhere in your breakpoint. As it is, a ghost component means it does not return anything as output. It should not conflict with the rest of your page content. So let's position it to top 0 and left 0 in our desktop breakpoint. In order to begin with our mouse parallax component, first we need to define a unique ID for the parent container, as well as all of the child elements, which is a part of the parallax effect. And for floating content, which is centrally placed like this text, we need to wrap it in a frame and give it a width of 100%. We are doing it so the mouse parallax effect does not conflict with the position of our content, as mouse parallax works by changing the element position in mouse movement. Leaving a floating centrally placed element like this can behave abnormally with this sudden change of position. Next, we are going to define an ID for our parent container from the scroll section. Let's call it container and define an ID for the rest of the elements. Again, the ID should be unique to prevent any sort of conflict between elements. Once we have ID for all of the elements, let's go to the mouse parallax component. First, it receives the ID of our parent ID. So here we need to provide the ID of our parent container, which is container in our case. Then we have movement axis. So if you set the movement axis to both, the parallax effect will work in both horizontal and vertical direction. But you can specify the direction you want the mouse parallax to work. Then we have the children array. Here we can add all of the elements in which we want the parallax effect to work. Let's first add our background layer, which has an ID of triangle. So set the ID triangle, and let's set the speed something like 100 milliseconds so that it moves very slowly with the mouse movement. Then we have reverse movement property control. This property control allows you to set the mouse parallax effect in the opposite direction. It means if the mouse cursor is moving from left to right, the mouse parallax will happen right to left. We will see it in action in just a moment. Let's enable it for now. Next, we have property control to set the horizontal and vertical sensitivity. They will determine how far the parallax elements will move in horizontal and vertical direction. So let's set the horizontal sensitivity 32 because we want our elements to move a longer distance on the parallax effect. Let's keep the rest of the values default for now. Now if we preview, we can see the background layer is moving with the mouse movement. Next, we are going to add the parallax effect with the rest of the components and adjust their speed accordingly. The farthest layer or the background layer should have the least movement, and the closest layer or the particles layer in our case should move in most speed for a realistic parallax effect. Now, for our large particle, we want it to behave slightly differently. So let's set the speed to 2000 milliseconds and set the horizontal sensitivity to something like 40 so it covers the most duration while moving. Let's increase the transition speed a bit. Then we have lock reverse movement property control, and we will use it in this particle. This property control allows to lock the element movement in only one direction and prevent it from moving in its opposite direction. Now, if we preview, we can see the large particle is moving only one direction, but does not move to the opposite direction like the rest of our elements. It is only going to its default position, which is here in this case. Now, as we can see, our mouse parallax effect is working pretty well, but the design elements are kind of static, and a little bit of movement can make them better. So the next thing we are going to do, we are going to add some movement effects to them. So let's select a particle and add a loop effect in it. Let's set the rotation to 0 and set the type to mirror type. let's set the X offset 8 and 15 in Y offset. For the transition, let's set the ease to ease in out and increase the time to 3 seconds. So now if we preview, we can see the element is slightly moving, adding a bit more life to our design. So let's copy the effect and add it to the rest of the particles. For our center looper sprite, we are going to add an infinite rotating effect. But first, let's wrap it into a frame and set the width to fit content and height to fit content as well. We are doing it because the movement of our parallax effect may conflict with the looping effect provided by Framer. So it is always a good idea to add the parallax to a Framer effect-free layer. Let's rename it to Looper. Let's actually remove the ID from the Looper sprite and add it to our container so that the parallax effect affects the container and not the actual looping sprite. Now add the loop effect to the sprite. So go to Effect and select the loop. We are only going to set the time to 10 seconds. Now, if we preview, we can see the looper sprite is rotating and the parallax effect moving the particles and everything. And finally, add our center text to the Mouse Parallax component. Let's enable reverse movement for this as well and set the horizontal sensitivity to 32 so it matches with the rest of the elements. Here we can see all of the elements now adopt the parallax effect. And finally, we can add some static content to our page just to differentiate between the movable nature of the mouse parallax effect and the rest of the static page contents. Finally, let's publish the project. And here you have it, a fully functional mouse parallax effect built on Framer.